Hi, I'm Jaclyn Ringstmeier, Executive Director of the Greater Medina Chamber of Commerce. Thank you for joining us today to watch our annual Candidates Forum. We do this event in partnership with Medina TV, and I'm here today with General Manager Jarrod Fry.
Thank you, Jaclyn. You will notice today, as Jaclyn and I do not have our mask on, and as I interview these candidates, I will not be wearing a mask, nor will the candidates. We are following all the Department of Health guidelines in regards to spatial distancing, and with being on air and doing a broadcast, masks are not required.
All candidates in local contested races were invited to participate in these interviews. This forum is designed to inform the voting public of their choices in the upcoming election.
The views and opinions stated by the candidates during the course of these interviews are not necessarily those of Medina TV and the Greater Medina Chamber of Commerce.
Thank you for joining us today, and thank you for exercising your right to vote in the upcoming election. Enjoy the Candidates Forum.
Joining us now in studio is Christina Collins. She's the candidate for District 5 State Board of Education. Christina, thank you for joining us here today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
First, let's start off, before I get into the questions about the office, let's tell us a little bit about yourself.
I live here in Medina. I have 4 kids, 2 of which are currently in Medina City schools and 2 are in daycare, so they're all under the age of 11. I'm an educator. I've been an educator for 12 years. I started out teaching high school English and then worked at OSU a little bit, Ohio State University, and then moved to the area about 8 years ago now. So I've been in Medina for 8 years as a district administrator, both at Medina and then at Buckeye. Currently, I'm an adjunct at Kent State University, where I also received my PhD in curriculum and instruction.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Well, thank you for joining us. And start off first, because I think a lot of voters, they kind of know the local school board because we do the meetings here on Medina TV. Kind of explain what the State Board of Education is.
So the state board is not a policy-making body. That's really important because people think that the state board maybe makes the laws or, directs the local district from that level. So it does not make policy. But what it does do is hire the superintendent of instruction for the state of Ohio, who then is over the Ohio Department of Education. And what the Ohio Department of Education does is translates all the policy into what districts actually have to do. So they write the standards and they write collaboratively with communities the 5-year strategic plan for the state of Ohio. So the state board oversees all of that, the action work.
Okay.
They also serve on committees with legislators. They have opportunities to influence policy, and they're a bridge between the two, between the law and the action. So they approve the standards that are set out by the state of Ohio. They direct the resources that the Ohio Department of Education pushes out.
Okay, so I think you kind of answered this, but I'll get it a second time around here. As they look at a local school board, because like I said, a lot of our residents might be used to seeing the meetings we have on, how does the role differ for the state board? I think you kind of just touched on it again, but I'll give you an opportunity to talk a little more.
Yeah, so local school boards, so just as an example, I think at a lot of districts, local school boards approve, say, the reading list, like the novels that are going to be read in school. Local school boards can say, this is a good list, or no, we don't want this book to be taught in the district, something along those lines. So they actually impact at the local level the direction of the district. But the state board helps to push out kind of guidance documents for local districts. So in July, for example, the State Board of Education approved an anti-racism resolution, which just says that as a state, we need to be more intentional about looking at what we're teaching at the local level to ensure that we are not missing groups represented, having all groups represented in our curriculum. So some local districts then also adopted their own anti-racism resolutions, which just said, okay, the state is giving us this kind of direction. This has nothing to do with law or policy, but just as a vision of education as a whole. So local districts, some of them adopted similar resolutions saying we're going to be intentional about when we review your novels lists, again, for example, we're looking for all groups to be represented. So it's kind of a chain where one group is guiding the other. But again, that state board has more, a little more pull with directing the law and where the law could go by having a closer connection with legislatures.
And is it kind of a big, kind of look at the big picture? Because most school districts would look at their specific area, not 88 counties with hundreds of school districts.
Yeah.
So it's a fair assessment to make that way. So I guess what drew you to want to run for this office?
So I've always been interested in politics. I do have an educational background, and right now, the reason right now is because we have such an opportune time for schools, because everything that we've known about education, what we've known about testing and report cards and how we teach and what we teach, all of that has kind of been thrown out the window by the pandemic. And I think that if we have some educator voices, especially some pro-public educator voices, on the State Board of Education, that we could start thinking differently about some of the things that like I said, we've always known. What could we do differently with standardized testing? We haven't had it for a year. So looking ahead, is there something else that we could do? Another reason right now is because we have a lot of traditional public schools that are losing a lot of money to charter schools and to Ed Choice voucher private schools. And part of that is a lot of the voices represented on the state board are pro-charter and pro-voucher people, and not necessarily people that are in public schools who understand that impact of losing those funds to other school systems, essentially.
Well, you just did a great job, because I was going to delve into all these questions, and you just hit on all of them for me here. So let's kind of break down what you just said a little bit. First, let's start with the whole COVID crisis. With COVID-19 coming in, all the changes and changes, if elected, what would you kind of be looking at doing?
All the changes, I want to start there, because part of the issue that a lot of the public schools have dealt with recently is the changes are so frequent. I was helping with Buckeye when we were trying to plan graduation, and I think all schools were experiencing the same thing, where we would have a plan, and then the next day the governor would say, no, you can't do that. So then we'd have a plan, and then the next day the governor would say, no, you can't do that. So I think I have to give a lot of kudos to our schools, because they have been able to respond as best as they can with this information rolling out the way that it has. And a lot of the summer guidance didn't even come out until the second half of July. So I just think that they've done a fantastic job. Now, on the state board, hopefully we never have another situation like this, but part of what a state board member can do is they have the power to convene, which means I could work in concert with our ESCs to pool, and a lot of ESCs did do this, but I could work in concert with them to pull together stakeholders, be it community members, parents, administrators in the districts, to problem solve. Because I think one of the things that happened was everyone was trying to solve their own problems, so each district kind of dug into itself and was trying to work through it. Whereas I think as state board members, we can make sure that the resources that are available through ODE are getting out to the districts and to the communities, but also that we're representing our constituents and their needs. And I think that there was just a lot of turmoil for parents and communities. What are we going to do? Where are our kids going to go? And maybe that communication could have been improved a little bit. So looking ahead, I would look to use that power of convening to bring stakeholders together, as well as making sure that community members, parents, teachers, administrators' voices are represented at the state board level.
Okay, great. Now, you also, another thing you just mentioned in the previous answer was talking about all the testing.
Yeah.
And that goes from the state testing. I know there's been ACT, SAT, colleges working with those during this crisis, and then also the state report cards coming out. What are your thoughts? I know I kind of threw a lot at you there, but with all of those, and like you had mentioned a moment ago, to have a clean slate.
Yeah. So interestingly, I've said this a couple of different times, but in this situation, this pandemic situation that no educator is really trained to handle, local districts were given all of the control. It was like, here you go, figure it out. But educators are trained in educating kids. They are trained in assessing where they're at in their learning and moving them ahead in their learning. And yet, that's the one thing we do not give local control over. We hold that at the state. We hold standardized testing as being this big, important accountability measure. So with what we're dealing with right now, we already know kids are behind. Districts are already creating their own assessments to try and figure out, where are the kids at. They're already trying to move them individually in their learning. And again, we didn't have to have tests last year, and everything is still moving. So I sort of feel like, I know Betsy DeVos has said there will absolutely be testing in the spring. I know the state was trying to apply for waivers, and I know the legislators are trying to address with various bills on decreasing the amount of testing. I just think that we need to give more local control over assessments, and whatever the reporting mechanism or regulations need to be for them to report local assessment scores. I mean, that's something that we could discuss and see what we could do with that. But I think we need to give more local control over our testing.
And that's good. Now, and then another thing you talked about is the ed choice. I know that's kind of an issue there too. And I guess, correct me if I'm wrong here too, it's more of how funding is with a student. So a student is attached with a dollar amount. That dollar amount follows that student where they go, whether that be the local school district or to a charter school or to another school of their choice. And that's how the funding follows. So it does play with different school districts in terms of their revenue either being lost or gained with those students coming and going. I guess you had mentioned it earlier, so I want to give you a chance to kind of expound on that topic.
I would like to see us refocus as a state on supporting our public schools, our traditional public schools. See, charters are public schools; they're considered to be that, but they do not have the same regulations that a public school does. Charter schools can pick and choose which kids they accept. Charter schools never have to levy for their funds, so communities never have an opportunity. Unlike how levy voting works, where a community gets to say, we're unhappy with the services you're providing, so we're voting down the levy. Communities never get that opportunity when it comes to charter schools. And a lot of charter schools are for profit. And I just adamantly believe that nobody should be profiting off of the education of kids, particularly when a charter school has the opportunity to open and close at will. There's no real, they may have standardized testing, but there's no real accountability. There's no consequences tied to their report card scores. Again, unlike the public school where that report card score has a meaning for them and for their community. So charter schools, I would like to see those funds stay in the traditional public school. And I would like us to think differently about charter schools. Instead of, we need this totally separate business model happening in education, I'd like us to think more about magnet schools within a district. So the money stays in the district. There are specialized opportunities for students, arts schools, STEM schools. I'd like to see us rethink our model with charters.
And then you brought up a good point in the midst of that answer, that school funding. Always has been an issue through the years of finding ways to fund districts. And then, of course, on the state level, the wide range of income that comes into all these different districts. What are your thoughts on school funding, and what would you like to see done with it?
Well, I certainly want to see a constitutional funding system. We haven't, a lot of people know that the funding system using property taxes and levying the way that we have was determined to be unconstitutional in the 90s. I know there's legislation, the Cupp-Patterson bill was going through, I think, last summer, and then it stopped, it met its end. And I know with the legislation trying to work its way through right now, they hope to have a different funding system in by the end of December. But this has been 30 years. It's time for us to really fix our funding. And again, the state board doesn't have the ability to write laws or to write the budget or anything, but what we do have right now there are 5 people running in 5 different districts in the state of Ohio who are pro-public education, who all have a similar mindset as I'm mentioning with correctly funding our schools. And if those 5 people could be part of a board of 18 people and could voice that opinion, I think that it could have an impact.
Now, in terms of impact with the COVID crisis and going back to those issues, there's been a move towards, because of the virus, an online learning process. And that could open the door for future online learning versus in-person learning. What are your thoughts as we kind of head down that road a little bit?
You know, as a parent, I do see a lot of value in online learning. I mean, it's given me some more flexibility with my kids. You know, we just got a puppy a couple months ago, so when they're on a break and can take the puppy for a walk, I mean, that's wonderful. So I see a lot of benefit to that, but I see that some parents may take advantage of that. So in keeping with what I mentioned about charter schools and magnet schools, it would be an opportune time for districts to further develop this online curriculum, this online thinking. And I don't know, how that would work with teachers' unions. Could you hire a teacher who's only an online English teacher for 7th grade? And again, that goes back to funding. We have to have appropriate and adequate funding for our schools to be even able to consider doing something innovative like that. But as far as my kids, I want them to be back in school for sure. I don't want them to be online forever. But it's a good time for schools to maybe consider that, and that would prevent some of these kids leaving to go to online charter schools as well.
Now, another hot topic issue, and you kind of touched on it a little bit earlier in one of your answers, but I'm going to circle back, is kind of the social injustice from the LGBTQ community within a school district, as well as the racial injustice within a school district. And as you're looking as the state as a whole in terms of education, kind of what things would you like to see put in place in regards to those issues?
Yeah, it's challenging because here I am saying I want to see local control. And I've really been thinking a lot about this recently, because my question is, how can we push the state forward and also have local control? Because there are local communities that are resistant to both of those messages. And maybe they don't see themselves as being influenced by diversity of any kind. So I'm really kind of wrestling with that myself, that I want local communities to have control. I want local boards of education to be able to have more say over what is taught. The standards themselves that come out of the state are very broad. They're void of content, is what I like to say. So I don't know yet how to push the state forward while also letting local governments have control. I'm not sure about that yet.
Yeah. Okay. Now, in terms of your own personal skill set or your traits, what do you think sets you apart from your opponent?
Well, I do know that my opponent voted no against the State Board of Education's anti-racism resolution in July, and I do know that there was a comment made that we do not have systemic racism in Ohio. I just have a completely opposing belief. I believe there are systems in place, and they do hurt some kids. And just from my background as an educator and my advocacy for public schools, I believe that all kids should have quality opportunities for education. I do believe that parents should have choice, because a school building is not the best situation for all kids. So I do believe parents should have choice, whether it be charters or private or home schools. But I also believe that we need to adequately and appropriately fund our traditional public schools before we worry about funding the other kinds. So we have very different views, I think, on those issues.
Okay. Again, this was Christina Collins. She's a candidate for District 5 State Board of Education. And Christina, this is your opportunity. I'm going to let you take over the mic and talk directly into the camera to our residents and let them know anything you would like to let them know.
I obviously would appreciate your vote this November. I think that I bring something new to the conversation about our traditional public schools. This district, District 5, is a very large district. It covers 8 counties, and it's a very diverse population. We go from Richland and Holmes all the way up to Bay Village and to the western and eastern sides of Cuyahoga County. So I'm here. If you would like to talk about education, you can reach out on my Facebook page. It's Dr. Collins for State Board via email, and my phone number is also on there. So I'm happy to discuss educational issues.
Perfect. Thank you. Again, that's Christina Collins, the candidate for District 5 State Board of Education. I'd normally love to shake hands, but I'll just virtually kind of shake your hand, fist bump. Yes, exactly. And wish you the best this November.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.